The moment 12-year-old Alex Rodriguez and his 8-year-old sister Mia rolled onto the Voice Kids stage, something unprecedented filled the studio. Alex walked with the jerky, repetitive movements characteristic of autism spectrum disorder, his hands flapping excitedly as he took in the overwhelming sensory input of the bright lights and massive space. Beside him, Mia navigated her pink wheelchair with practiced ease, her cerebral palsy affecting her motor skills but never diminishing the brilliant smile that lit up her face. What happened next would shatter every assumption about ability, family bonds, and the many forms that music can take. Because sometimes the most powerful performances come from hearts that beat in perfect harmony, even when words don't come easily. Their mother, Carmen Rodriguez, watched from the family area, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. She had fought for 17 years to get her children the support they needed, and now they were about to step into the biggest moment of their young lives. Let me take you back to understand how these extraordinary siblings reached this stage, because their journey proves that music finds a way to flow through every barrier. Alex Rodriguez had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 3 years old. His world was one of intense sensory experiences, where sounds could be overwhelming or magical, where routine provided safety, and where communication happened in ways that typical children couldn't always understand. He rarely spoke in full sentences, preferring gestures, sounds, and the complex rhythms he could create by tapping on any surface. Mia had been born with cerebral palsy that affected her speech and motor functions. She communicated primarily through sign language and a speech device, her bright mind trapped in a body that didn't always cooperate with her intentions. But where words failed her, expression flourished. Her face could convey more emotion in a single look than most people managed in entire conversations. The Rodriguez family lived modestly in East Los Angeles, where Carmen worked as a teacher's aide specializing in special education. She had raised both children as a single mother after their father left when Mia's disabilities became apparent. Money was always tight, but Carmen had discovered something that changed everything. Her children shared a musical connection that transcended their individual challenges. It started when Alex was 6 and Mia was 2. Carmen had been playing music to help calm Alex during one of his sensory overload episodes when she noticed something remarkable. As the rhythm pounded through the speakers, Alex began to create complementary beats, tapping complex patterns that somehow perfectly matched the music. And Mia, barely old enough to sit up properly, was moving her hands in what Carmen gradually realized wasn't random motion, but sign language interpretation of the emotions the music made her feel. Over the years, their musical partnership had evolved into something extraordinary. Alex discovered he had an incredible gift for beatboxing, creating complex rhythmic soundscapes using only his voice and breath. His autism, which made verbal communication challenging, seemed to disappear when he was creating beats. The repetitive, pattern-based nature of rhythm spoke to his brain in ways that traditional language couldn't. Mia, meanwhile, had developed her own form of musical expression. Unable to sing clearly due to her cerebral palsy, she had created a beautiful fusion of sign language and interpretive movement that told stories, conveyed emotions, and painted pictures in the air. When she performed, audiences found themselves understanding every word she never spoke. Together, they had performed at school assemblies, community centers, and local events throughout Los Angeles. Alex would create intricate beatbox compositions, while Mia translated the emotions into flowing sign language that looked like visual music. They didn't just perform together, they completed each other's artistic expression. The idea to audition for the Voice Kids came from their special education teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who had witnessed one of their performances and been moved to tears. "Carmen," she had said, "the world needs to see what your children can do. They're not just talented, they're revolutionary." The audition process had been complicated. The producers weren't sure how to accommodate two contestants who communicated so differently, who needed specialized support, who didn't fit any category they'd ever worked with before. But when they saw the siblings' audition video, Alex creating an incredible beatbox version of Happy while Mia signed and moved to every beat, They knew they had to find a way to make it work. Standing on the voice stage now, both children felt the magnitude of the moment in their own ways. For Alex, the sensory input was overwhelming. The lights brighter than anything he'd experienced, the sounds of the audience and equipment creating a cacophony that his autism made difficult to process. For Mia, the physical challenges of performing in a new space, with different lighting and positioning than she was used to, made every movement more difficult than usual. Shelton, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan all sat forward in their red chairs, immediately recognizing that they were about to witness something unlike any audition in The Voice history. "Take your time," Blake called out gently, his voice carrying that Oklahoma warmth that had become his trademark. "We're excited to hear what you've got for us." Alex began to stim more intensely, his hands flapping rapidly, his body rocking back and forth as the overwhelming environment pushed his sensory processing beyond its limits. The movements that usually helped him self-regulate were becoming more pronounced, more obvious, drawing attention in ways that made him feel exposed and vulnerable. Mia, seeing her brother's distress and feeling her own anxiety spike as her speech device malfunctioned under the studio lights, began to cry. Not quiet tears, but the frustrated sobs of someone who had something important to say but couldn't find the words to say it. Alex, seeing his sister's tears, became even more agitated. He began making loud vocalizations, not words but sounds that expressed his frustration and overwhelming need to help Mia but not knowing how. The carefully planned performance they had practiced for months was falling apart under the pressure of the moment. "I can't, the machine won't work," Mia managed to say through her tears, her words slurred by cerebral palsy and distorted by emotion. "Alex is scared, I can't help him." The studio fell into that particular kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they're witnessing something heartbreaking and deeply human. These weren't just nervous contestants having stage fright. These were two children with disabilities having genuine distress reactions to an environment that was pushing them beyond their coping abilities. Carmen started to move from the family area, but production staff gently held her back. This was the children's moment, and somehow, everyone sensed that the right help was about to come from an unexpected source. Shelton made a decision that would define not just this audition, but his entire understanding of what it means to be human. He stood up from his red chair and walked directly onto the stage, abandoning every protocol The Voice had about maintaining distance during auditions. But he wasn't alone. Kelly Clarkson, mother of two and someone who had always been drawn to helping children, followed him onto the stage. Within moments, all four coaches had left their chairs and were walking toward Alex and Mia. "Hey guys," Blake said softly as he approached, his voice stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. "I'm Blake, and this is Kelly, John, and Niall. We can see you're having some big feelings right now, and that's okay." Kelly knelt down beside Mia's wheelchair, her maternal instincts kicking in immediately. "Sweetheart, what do you need? How can we help?" Alex's stimming intensified, but Blake recognized something that others might have missed. The sounds Alex was making, the patterns he was tapping on his legs, they weren't random. They were rhythmic, musical, purposeful. "Alex," Blake said, getting down on his knees so he was at the boy's eye level, "I can hear music in what you're doing. Those sounds you're making, they're beats, aren't they?" Alex's rocking slowed slightly, his eyes focusing on Blake for the first time since the breakdown began. He nodded, then made a complex rhythm with his voice that sounded like a human drum machine. Meanwhile, Kelly was working with Mia, helping her calm down enough to explain what had gone wrong. "The machine that helps me talk broke," Mia managed to sign and speak simultaneously. "And Alex gets scared when I'm sad, and I get scared when he's scared, and we were supposed to show everyone how we make music together, but everything went wrong." John Legend, a father himself, and someone deeply moved by the children's obvious bond, spoke up. "What if we forget about machines and fancy equipment? What if you just show us how you two make music together, just like you do at home?" Niall added, "We don't need perfect performances. We just want to see what makes you two special." But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Blake stood up and addressed the entire studio, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades understanding what real talent looked like. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're about to witness something that's going to change the way we think about music, about performance, about what it means to communicate through art. These two young people are going to show us that music isn't just about singing pretty songs. Music is about connection, about understanding, about finding ways to share your heart when words aren't enough." He turned back to Alex and Mia. "Now I want you two to do exactly what you do when you're at home, when you're comfortable, when you're just being yourselves. Can you do that for us?" Alex looked at Mia, who was calming down with Kelly's gentle support. Mia looked back at her brother and signed something that made him smile for the first time since they'd walked onto the stage. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Alex began to beatbox, but not the polished performance they had planned. Instead, he created something raw, emotional, spontaneous, a rhythm that expressed everything he'd been feeling, the fear and excitement and overwhelming love for his sister. His sounds filled the studio with complex polyrhythms that seemed impossible for one person to create. And Mia, without any assistive technology, began to sign and move to her brother's beats. Her movements, limited by cerebral palsy, became a dance of pure emotion. Every gesture told a story about growing up different, about finding your voice when words don't come easy, about the unbreakable bond between siblings who understand each other without speaking. Together, they created something that transcended traditional performance. Alex's beatboxing provided the heartbeat while Mia's signing painted pictures in the air. They were telling their story, about being different, about facing challenges, about finding joy and connection in music in a world that didn't always understand them. The coaches stood watching, tears streaming down their faces as they witnessed something that couldn't be taught, couldn't be manufactured, couldn't be replicated. This was pure human expression, art in its most authentic form. When they finished, the silence in the studio was reverent. Then Blake began to applaud, followed by Kelly, then John and Niall, then the entire audience. But this wasn't typical competition applause. This was recognition of something sacred, the power of love, determination, and artistic expression to transcend any barrier. Blake walked over to the siblings, his voice thick with emotion. "Alex, Mia, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced in my life. You didn't just perform music, you showed us what music really is. You showed us that the most powerful art comes from the most authentic hearts." Kelly, still kneeling beside Mia's wheelchair, added, "You two have something that can't be taught. You have each other. And you have a way of sharing your souls that makes everyone who watches you feel less alone in the world." John Legend, himself clearly moved, said, "What you just did was revolutionary. You showed us that music has no boundaries, no limitations, no rules except the ones that come from the heart." Niall, the youngest coach, added simply, "You made me understand that some of the most powerful voices are the ones that don't use words at all." All four coaches hit their buttons simultaneously, their chairs spinning to face the siblings in a moment of unanimous recognition. Alex and Mia chose Team Blake and Kelly together, the first time in voice history that siblings would be coached by two coaches working in partnership. Blake and Kelly recognized that separating these two would diminish what made them special. Over the following weeks, the coaches learned as much from Alex and Mia as they taught them. Blake discovered new ways to think about rhythm and timing by working with Alex's unique beatboxing style. Kelly learned about emotional expression by watching Mia translate feelings into movement. "These kids changed everything for me," Blake said in an interview during the live shows. "They reminded me that music isn't about fitting into categories or meeting expectations. Music is about finding your own voice and having the courage to share it with the world." The siblings' journey through the competition became a masterclass in inclusion, adaptation, and the power of authentic artistic expression. Their version of "Count on Me" showcased their musical telepathy. Their original composition, Different Voices, became an anthem for anyone who had ever felt like they didn't fit in. In the finale, Alex and Mia performed a piece they had created specifically for The Voice, a beatbox and sign language interpretation of What a Wonderful World that left the entire studio in tears. They didn't win the competition, but they accomplished something far more important. They proved that talent comes in infinite forms, that communication transcends language, and that some of the most powerful performances come from people who dare to be authentically themselves. In their final performance speech, delivered through a combination of Alex's sounds and Mia's signing, they shared a message that resonated far beyond the competition. Everyone has music inside them. It might sound different or look different, but it's still music, and the world needs all kinds of music. Blake and Kelly stood behind them throughout their speech, both crying openly as these two children taught millions of viewers about acceptance, love, and the infinite ways that humans can connect through art. Today, Alex and Mia continue to perform throughout California and beyond, using their platform to advocate for inclusion in the arts and to show the world that disability doesn't diminish talent. It creates new forms of artistic expression. Their story changed the Voice Kids forever, leading to new accommodation protocols and a deeper understanding of the many ways that talent can manifest. But more importantly, they changed hearts and minds, proving that some of the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected sources. Blake Shelton learned something that night that changed his approach to music forever. Alex and Mia taught me that the best artists aren't the ones who fit the mold. The best artists are the ones who break the mold and show us something we've never seen before. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that don't use words. Sometimes the most moving performances come from hearts that beat in perfect harmony. And sometimes two children who communicate differently than everyone else can teach the world what it really means to make music together. Alex and Mia Rodriguez proved that The Voice isn't about conforming to expectations. It's about finding your unique way to share your heart with the world, and discovering that when you do, people will listen, learn, and love in ways they never thought possible.